Okay, so let's get rolling. Thanks for confirming. So, doesn't really matter whether you're new to the guitar or if you've been playing for a long time, you can always make use of more melody in your playing, because melody is the foundation of pretty much anything in music. You can have a great rhythm, but if there's no melody, that great rhythm is gonna stand there alone. So we really wanna implement melody as a basis of our playing. This is super important. Think of it this way. If you have melody as your foundation, you can add anything on top of that and it's gonna sound great, it's gonna sound listenable, and you can take it anywhere. You can shred on top of a great melody and shredders are gonna love it. However, if you look at it the other way around, you start by having some crazy technique as your foundation, but no melody on top. No one's gonna like that. Not even the shredders. So you really want to have a melodic foundation, because on top of that you can add anything. So in today's tutorial, I'm gonna give you some examples of how you can start with a super simple melody and you can add some variation to it and add some more advanced playing to it and even add a little bit of shredding to it to take it to a really advanced level. Okay. Sure, Balint, we'll put out the full live. You can find all the previous live streams here on our channels. Benjamin, what's up? Okay, so let's do this. If you click the link under the video or in the video description, you're gonna see a pretty basic melody. So we can just hit that low E note and then do... That's gonna be our starting point, a super basic melody. So please do check out that little tab there and you can see what I'm doing. And while you check that out, I'm gonna see if I can just share this. Okay, great. So I suggest you spend some time with this, because you're going to need to add some vibrato to this. You can even add a rake in the beginning, which will be this kind of thing. Right? We play those dampened strings. So we're going to touch our strings lightly, either with the left hand or with the palm of our right hand, so we get this kind of sound, right? We don't want to be doing, and we don't want to be fretting here so that we hear, right? We want to lightly touch the string so that we hear the damp notes. And this way we can create a rake which leads to our first note in the melody. Like that. Okay? And then pull off, and then we're gonna skip a string and play that D string. And it's always nice to add something unexpected in your melodies, because if I were just playing 3 notes down, like D, 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 like that, it would sound more scalar. But here, I'm keeping it super simple while still adding some elements of unpredictability. Okay. When you got that down, you might feel you need some additional flavor and variation. And let's do something simple here. We can just do... Right? So we add that little drill there. So 7, 8, 7. So it's pretty much the same melody. We're still relying on this melodic movement. But we're adding that little drill in there. And it does add a lot of flavor. Kicks things around rhythmically. So that's a basic way of throwing in some variation on this example melody we got going. Okay, well, what if we want to do more than this? After all, perhaps we want to play a full-blown lead. Maybe we're not just into doing like a simple melodic fill that's going to go on top of some other orchestration or some harmony for some vocals. Maybe we're really going for a guitar lead. Now, typically with guitar leads, we want to throw in maybe some faster runs to grab some attention and get a little bit fancier than just relying on a basic melody. So here's the first example of that, how you can really add some scalar notes that build up towards this melody. And this is really key. Although this is in a very basic form, you can take this anywhere you want. So for this reason, I've tabbed out the easiest way of doing it. So you can see on the tab it says like the first build up there. So we're gonna do. Okay. Again, it's super basic, but if you understand how I started with a basic melody and then added a scalar run that sort of builds towards this melody, then that concept, you can take it all the way to the highest levels. You can really go as crazy as you want with this stuff. The sky is the limit. So again, the concept I'm trying to get through to you is how you can use melodies as your foundation when you're playing lead guitar. And then it doesn't matter whether you want to shred or do something else. Melodies are always going to serve you extremely well. And in fact, it's the one thing that's going to catch the listener's ear. So again, you might just want to be doing some blues, right? You can always throw in a piece of melody into whatever you're doing. But to stay with our example here, I'm just going to do one more time that basic build-up. Wobbly-doo, thank you so much. Cerebellum, good evening. So, we have... So that's just a basic example of how you can mix some scalar notes and a scalar run with whichever melody you're starting out with. But what if we want to be more advanced than this? Well, the final example I've tabbed out to you contains more of a shred kind of run, and for this reason, you'll also find a scale diagram in that link below. And that scale diagram is showing you both like a standard minor, it's like the fifth minor scale box. But I've done a little exception there. I've shown you there's one note that's being doubled in there, and that's for the simple reason I want to be able to play 3 notes per string here in order to achieve this kind of shred run. So I want to be able to do, right? That's, again, in its basic form. It shows you how you can throw in faster passages and still weave them together with that basic melody you've got going. This is a really important concept. That's why I'm trying to hammer it in. And it doesn't matter if you want to do like legato. You can even throw in some hybrid picking, which was the topic of my previous live stream. Right? Or if you want to throw in that variation, which is the second tab I showed you, you could do... And it's getting, I don't know if you can spot this, but we started out with something super simple. And as we've added these layers of additional complexity, or however you want to describe it, we're now getting pretty far away from the original melody and concept in terms of how it sounds. However, in terms of what we're doing, we're still sticking to the same concept. We're just adding some notes here and there. We're adding a fast run. And I also want to add that maybe you don't know how to play fast yet. And let's face it, most of our viewers here don't really know how to play fast because most players out there are not advanced players. But again, I want to point out that what you should get from this video is the actual concept of building up towards the melody. Now, perhaps you're not able to play these wide stretches and 3-note per string licks. You can still do like a pentatonic lick or anything, you know, just... right? Doesn't matter what exact notes or what exact licks you want to play, the concept still applies and the concept is still the same. Cool. So please feel free to shoot if you have any questions, or maybe you'd like me to cover something else that you've seen me play here. This topic of today, like melody building, we can see that as our starting point. And if you want to take this lesson to anywhere else, I'm all ears. So it'd be interesting to know how you guys, if this makes sense, this kind of melody building, and what you're making out of it. Question there by HIT. Do you mostly think of theory when you play? Actually, I'd say I don't think of theory much at all. However, I do have like a basic scale palette, or like a pattern I'm seeing when I'm playing. And typically, I'll rely on the minor scale or the pentatonic scales, which are the two most recent scales I've covered in my live streams here. So that's what I'm seeing as my basis. So there's a bit of theory in there, sure, those scales. But I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm thinking in terms of theory. I'm rather thinking. I try not to think when I'm playing for people, right? When I practice on my own and when I play on my own, I might alternate a little bit between like performing to myself, just in other words, just playing what is fun and whatever comes to my mind, and I might also do some more thinking. And usually when I start thinking, it doesn't sound as interesting anymore. So for me, thinking is more of a practice thing. So it's like I might jam around and then I stumble into something, and then I might stop and I'll start thinking about what I just did, and I'll start thinking of how I can come up with variations of that. But once I play, I might rely on some scales that I'm comfortable with, but I don't think a lot. Simply because when you think, you don't tend to perform as well. So I hear you ask like a follow-up question, but how the hell am I going to play well if I don't think? Well, if you need to think a lot in order to play well, then that simply means you've got more practicing to do. So it probably means you have to spend more time thinking a lot while playing, and that's fine, you should do that. But the more you do that, the easier it's going to get for you to just occasionally, you're going to jam away, and without realizing it, you've jammed for a couple of minutes. And that's when you reach that kind of, how should I say, mindset where you just play and you don't think. And I think that's actually should be part of your goal as as a guitarist, be able to perform without thinking and just feeling. It's such a cliche, but it's so true. If you can perform without thinking and just feeling and playing, then the performance tends to be so much better. And I think it makes sense in a way, because a lot of brain power is needed to kind of think and analyze what you're doing. And that means you can't allocate that brain power to actually coming up with stuff, right? So it makes sense that you should reach that state of mind where you're totally focused on the playing and you stop sort of thinking and analyzing. So yeah, but perhaps you guys have some questions about the actual theory I'm using here, and I'd be happy to break that down as well. So for this kind of thing, I'm mostly relying on the minor scale and a minor pentatonic scale. So just as with today's example in this melodic build-up, I'm playing the E minor scale. And then I have all these outside notes that I'm adding, and you can find more example of these in my previous scale live streams where I've sort of broken down, especially the pentatonic scale, which I really like to use as a foundation for pretty much adding any note on top of that. You know, I have this fun little exercise where I just try to add as many, you know, all the 12 notes, so all notes that's available to me, and sort of make them work in a single key, like the A minor pentatonic, when playing the A minor pentatonic scale. It's really fun because it forces you to break away a little bit from thinking in terms of, oh, now I need to play the minor scale and then I need to play the Dorian scale. And instead, it changes your mindset towards just adding any random note that you feel like, so it's fun. Please teach on how to eliminate string noise while playing solo and string muting techniques too while playing solo. Cool, that's a good question. Aki, what picks are you using? So I'm using Jazz 3s now. Can you see that? I don't think it's zoomed in. Let's try it like that instead. So it's Dunlop Jazz 3. So, string noise while playing solo. Well, first of all, you might notice that my sound is pretty clean, right? So I don't have huge problem with noise. However, I could turn the distortion up, right? And I would need to rely more on like string muting techniques. So I guess I gave away the answer there. It's all about muting the strings when you're performing in order to, you know, mute the unwanted strings and to get rid of that unwanted noise. And I use several different muting techniques, and you should too, because it's a really good thing to sort of incorporate into your playing, especially as you're practicing stuff slowly. And even as an advanced guitarist, when you're confronted with new material, you have to slow things down and really, you know, make sure you learn whatever passage you're practicing. And that's a good opportunity to try to think of string muting. And I'll give you a few examples here. We can start with a basic melody I provided to you with this lesson. So if you click that link in the description, and you're gonna find this, right? So, you might notice that when I'm picking this 8th note on the B string, I'm actually holding my index finger here, And it seemingly doesn't really serve a purpose because I'm playing on the B string 8th fret, right? Where my middle finger is fretting. So what the heck is this finger doing there? This finger is muting the other strings. So with this single finger, I'm able to effectively mute all the adjacent strings, which are the high E string, the G string, and even the D string, okay? So, oh, sorry, and you couldn't really see that, so I'm gonna move a little bit closer here. There you go. So yeah, with the index finger, I'm muting the E string, the G string, and the D string, right? And this is cool because those are the strings that are most likely gonna give me problems as I'm aiming towards that B string with the pick, right? Then there's also, especially at high volume levels and, sorry, like if you're rehearsing and there's a lot of feedback going, there's still a risk that those two bottom strings, like A and the E string, they're gonna give you noise as well. So I deal with them by muting here with my palm, right? So with this method, I've covered all the strings I'm not playing, right? I'm playing the B string and I'm muting all the other ones. So there's absolutely no noise happening there. And you might be asking yourself, okay, if that's just for one single note, but what happens when I'm playing the next note? Do I have to reposition all my different muting fingers, and how the hell am I gonna have the time to think of that? And that's a very good question, right? You don't have the time to think about that, which is the reason why this has to be practiced at a slow tempo. And that's why I started this explanation by mentioning that this is a good thing to think about whenever you're practicing something slow. So next time you learn something from scratch, regardless of what your current level is, you can use that opportunity to think a little extra about your muting technique, okay? So that's like a rough explanation of muting, right? There are many other techniques you can use, and one other springs to mind. It's also a good idea to actually try doing some muting with the fretting finger. So even if I only had that one single finger at my disposal, and I was fretting the 8th fret there on the B string, I could still be dampening the G and the E string, right? So when you add that, plus that extra finger there, plus the dampening here with the right hand, you end up with a pretty good coverage of the other strings as well. So in other words, there is plenty of real estate there to do some muting, right? Especially when you're playing leads, because typically with leads, you don't play much more than 1 or 2 notes at a time. So the other fingers should be able to do stuff, right? Cool, so I hope that helps. My problem is I always stuck in patterns. I already know and how to play it. Sometimes I got something new, but then I go back to what I know. And this happened to me when I tried to jam. Cool. That's a really good question. How can I sort of break out of the rut? How can I play something new and not play those, 5 licks, all the same 5 licks all the time? And that's, I think, something a lot of guitarists are struggling with. So it's definitely a good topic for us to cover here. So, whenever I play nowadays, it tends to be somewhat improvised, right? I'll maybe hit a few, hit like some basic harmony and then... So these are not per se like licks, even though I do heavily rely on patterns. They are a somewhat fresh combination of stuff I've practiced, right? This might sound easy in theory, but it's something you have to work on, right? It actually goes down to the way I look at practicing and how I've changed my practicing routine like the last couple of 5 or 6 years. And typically I would have these exercises that I would practice, and I would somewhat change them in between the different practice sessions. But basically the structure would be the same. I would have a bunch of fixed licks or exercises that I would practice, and they covered areas I figured I needed to improve on. And that's all fine and good, but the big problem with that was I was spending most of my practicing time repeating stuff, playing exercises, repeating licks. So it shouldn't come to as a surprise when you try to perform something that you're actually going to be playing mostly exercises and licks, right? Because that's what you've been practicing. You know, you're not likely to sit down and practice exercises or 5 licks for months and months, and then when you perform on stage, you're not going to come up with new stuff, right? You're going to play what you've been doing in your bedroom. That's the most likely thing that's going to happen. So how do you break away from that? Well, you have to change what you're doing in your bedroom. And I'm referring to what you're playing in your bedroom. Don't you go naughty on me. Anyhow, so you have to basically, if you want to come up with variations when you're performing, you have to come up with variations as you're practicing. That's the bottom line here. So how do you go about this? Well, that's a question I asked myself 6 years ago, and I was like, oh, how the hell am I going to come up with variations on the fly, you know? Because I was doing these kind of exercises, right? And, you know, I had worked up some technique there. So it's like, oh, okay, let's throw in some variations. And I would inevitably mess up immediately, right? So I learned the hard way, there is absolutely no point in trying to maintain a high tempo when you're coming up with variations, learning new licks, or trying to improvise. You really have to, you know, go slow. Okay, this is the key thing here. So I would stop with these exercises, and you know, if I were to try to improvise with legato, I wouldn't start doing that and then just think that I could magically start improvising all over the place. Although I probably could do that now, it certainly didn't work back in the days. So I had to slow down, and I did. Okay, good. Now I'm playing it at such a low tempo, my brain actually has a little bit of time there to think of what I should do next, okay? And I could even get adventurous there. Maybe I could skip a string. So that's like something I would never have come up with if I were to, you know, do that, right? So the big point here I'm trying to get through is that as a first step, you really have to take it even slower than what you currently consider slow, okay? Play your slowest and then divide that by 2 so that you play twice as slow. And there you should start approaching the kind of tempo you need to have in order to come up with new stuff on the fly. So if you're really honest about wanting to be able to improvise and jam, then this has to be your starting point, right? This is like the first thing you gotta do. You gotta slow down so that your brain has time to think about what to do next, so that your brain has time to think about coming up with new stuff. Because as I said, that has to be practiced. You cannot expect that to happen, you know, when you hit that record button or when you stand on stage and now's your time to shine, right? It doesn't work like that. You really have to do it in your practice sessions in order for you to actually make a positive change to your playing, right? So this is key. And I think that's the first step. And then, you know, there are a lot of details we can discuss, and this is actually a really good topic for coming live streams. But obviously, it's a good idea to practice in a setting that allows you to jam, right? So you might want to hit a backing track, have a backing track rolling, and you know, in the key of maybe E minor, like we're in now, and you can try that. Use this, you know, the melody I've been showing you as your foundation. You can start jamming around, and yeah. Cool. Some good questions there. This was a perfect explanation. Thank you so much. Scott is here. Awesome. Kennedy Leo. Awesome. Okay. So any tips on fretting notes with a relaxed, minimal tension touch? That's a really good question. And maybe we should explain to other viewers why that is even desirable. Why would you want to play with a minimal touch? Isn't it better if we have a lot of strength in our playing, so we have like the muscle force to shred? A lot of people tend to think that that's how it works, but it's actually the opposite, and hence the question here, which is a really good question. You want to play with a minimum amount of tension. Otherwise, you're going to run out of steam very fast, and you're going to have no control. Trust me. And you can ask any athlete in any sport, it's the same thing. You never ever want to tense up when you're trying to make your body do something, right? I would even guess that's applicable to like fighting and boxing, whatever. Yeah, you want to be in control of your muscle strength and your force, but you never want to intentionally tense up, okay? There are some scenarios on the guitar where you might need a little bit of tension, but even in those cases, you want to be in total control of tension. So this is a cool question. How do we play with like a relaxed touch? How can that be done? Now that I briefly mentioned the advantages to using like a light touch, how do we actually achieve that? So, first of all, I think it's important to understand you cannot play with a minimal amount of tension in your hands if any other part of your body is tensed up, okay? That's number one. So if you're really tensed up for some other reason, you're not gonna be able to relax with your hands, okay? So I'm not telling you to go to yoga classes, but yeah, go to yoga classes. No, but you wanna be relaxed, that's number one. So mostly, I guess that's gonna apply on your upper body. I'm gonna assume that you're not tensing your legs while you're playing, but who knows? But you want to be relaxed, especially in your upper body, and especially in your arms and in hands and fingers, right? Basically, the idea is that any amount of tension is okay, you know, any minimal amount of tension is okay as long as you can hear the note, right? So that should be a starting point. How loosely and lightly can you fret a note and still get some sound of it, right? That's so, I'm applying so much pressure now that the note goes out of tune, right? Here's E. This is really sharp. So I'm applying extreme amount of tension here. This technique is gonna get me nowhere. I'm just gonna injure myself. But that's the extreme. I'm really pressing hard. Softer, softer, softer. And now it's so soft that I no longer get a note ringing. So that's obviously too soft. So you wanna stop right before you kill that note. And this applies whether you're trying to play advanced chords or whatever, or if you want to play a scalar run. You really want to apply that minimum amount of pressure, and one way for you to investigate where the limits are is to do what I exactly did there. Just go so soft that you no longer can hear any notes, and then back it off a little bit. Hopefully that makes sense. So the reason we tense up as guitarists, maybe we have never actively thought about relaxing. So then I guess this lesson is really going to serve a good purpose. If you've never thought about this before, never heard about this, then this can just, the awareness itself can probably help you, because you're going to think more actively as you learn new stuff. Again, because when you learn new stuff, you tend to play slowly, and that's when you have time to think about being relaxed. You have time to think about your muting technique. You have time to think about this and that. So whenever you're learning new stuff and playing slowly, that is a good time to refine your technique and sort of kill those bad habits. So that's like a first step to realize it's actually a desirable thing to play with a relaxed touch. Now, once you've understood that and realized that, then it seems that a lot of people who attempt stuff they don't really master, and when they push speed, they tend to actually play with way too much tension and strength, and so basically that's a good signal. You need to dial it back a little bit, slow down a little bit, and maybe practice that technique a bit more. So if you record yourself with video, or if anybody tells you you're being tensed up, then that is a good time to scale back a little bit and try to practice separately whatever you were doing there. I find myself tensing up when I do maybe some stretchy stuff. That could sometimes kill me a little bit. Perhaps I need to apply, I need to practice what I preach. Maybe I should simply practice a bit more stretchy stuff. And also there are certain types of alternate picking where you cannot avoid being a bit tensed up, especially that 3-note per string Paul Gilbert thing where you play strict alternate picking like. It's easier with that Yngwie Malmsteen kind of picking where you don't rely on strict alternate picking. If you see my right hand here and compare, I don't know if you can see that I'm pretty relaxed as I do this. That's more of like an Yngwie style, whereas that kind of more Paul Gilbert, it does require more strength, and that's consistent with how you see the pros play it. Paul Gilbert has a very tensed right hand if you compare it to Yngwie. And there's no coincidence there. Those are different techniques, and they do require different execution. But yeah, I'm getting a bit entangled here in my explanation. But if you want to practice a light touch, then I would say step number 1, find where that light touch is. As I was saying, what's the minimal amount of pressure you can apply and still get a note ringing. And once you've kind of established that, you can start practice really slowly and make sure you are very conscious about not tensing up. And this has to be done at a slow tempo. There's just no way around it. And if there's a technique you find yourself constantly tensing up with, then it's time to go back to the drawing board. It's time to start practicing that technique very slowly again, so that you have time to think about not tensing up. It's a bit boring, and it's not a very might not be the most exciting reply, but I think that is the reality of it. You really have to go back and slow things down. Okay. Gary, I will rock on. Ooh, from Brazil, Sweden here. How to melody with changing chords? That's a cool question. I'm not going to dive into that now, simply because when I start speaking about like heavy theory topics in these chats, we lose most viewers, right? It's a bit of there's too much complexity to deal with it in like a video format. But the basic reply is to be able to follow the chords and make like a conscious choice over each and every chord, right? And in order to achieve that, you have to start mastering arpeggios, because arpeggios are the chord notes that are broken down. But I'll leave it at that, and you can search GMC for a lot of cool lessons that speak about that. Either, the Marty Friedman way of targeting notes, or like a jazzier approach to it. Cool. My pick is this kind of Jazz 3, small pick. Here we go. You can see it. Here we go. You can see it. So it's the Jazz 3 made by Dunlop. Exercises for economy picking, okay? Basically, the general answer to that would be to play like any exercise that involves alternate picking and break the strict down, up, down, up, down, up alternate picking motion, and instead do economy picking. So wherever it suits you, you might end up doing like 2 downstrokes in a row or stuff like that. So that's the general answer. Personally, I don't do it that much, but I find somewhat interesting to just play like 3 notes per string if we're in the key of A minor here. And then just play 1, 2, 3 and do down, up, down, down, up, down, down, so that you're breaking the strict alternate picking motion. But I don't like practicing economy picking that much because I have a better way of doing it, which is basically where you play picking plus legato, right? So if I'm playing 3 notes per string, I would pick 2 notes and then do the 3rd note with legato. This way I can still do like strict alternate picking, and I have the time to move my right hand up to the next string, simply because every 3rd note is going to be handled only by my left hand, which gives my right hand time to reposition and move on. So that's actually what I prefer to do. So I would do pick, pick, hammer on, pick, pick, hammer on, pick, pick, hammer on. And that's something typical economy pickers like Yngwie Malmsteen, that's a technique they use a lot as well. So that seems to go hand in hand with the idea of economy picking. So legato plus alternate picking is actually my preferred way of doing it. I'm not a super big fan of economy picking. I do like sweeping, which is a form of economy picking, you could say, because you're doing like down, 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 right? So if you want to practice that form of economy picking, you can find like a sweeping exercise. But for like traditional economy picking, I'm much more of a fan of like mixing alternate picking with legato. So and especially if I turn off the distortion there, turn it off, no one's gonna hear I'm not picking everything, or most people won't think about that at least. It sounds like it could be maybe some, I don't know, some Yngwie run, whatever. Oh, sorry, Gitara Vlog. You asked about my thickness. I didn't think about that. Let me see. What is the Jazz 3 pick? I haven't got a fresh one here, and it seems I've worn out the text on them. Maybe someone can help me out here. What is the thickness of a typical... Oh, there we have it. 1.14 millimeters is the thickness of a Jazz 3. So 1.4 millimeters. So it's a stiff pick. It's not bendable, right? It's stiff. Cool, my man Lavietto has changed his username. What's up, Black Crowd Busker? There's a cool question by Edman. How to incorporate arpeggios in a solo? So that is something I do all the time, and it's there are various reasons why you want to do that. One of them being that an arpeggio is by definition a chord which is broken down, a chord that's broken down, period. So that means you're playing the strong chord notes. So if your backing chord is E minor and you play the arpeggio of E minor, you're only targeting the strongest note available to you. So that is for sure one very good reason to be able to play arpeggios in your solos. Another reason for doing this would be because it breaks, especially when you're playing like scalar runs, it can get a bit tiring, to put it mildly. It's not that fun to listen to someone who does just... It can be fun for a couple of seconds, and then it's like, oh, are we gonna be hearing something else than just, that scalar run? And what I like to do is maybe do like a short scalar passage, And then I'll play an arpeggio downwards, right? Which means I'm only playing like one note per string, and there is definitely a perceivable and audible difference between playing 3 notes per string and then playing 1 note per string when going down. So by including an arpeggio in my run, I'm all of a sudden getting access to a tool which allows me to break away from scalar runs. And that in itself is pretty desirable, if you ask me. The way I go about doing this is I look at whichever key I'm in. Right now, let's say I'm in the key of E minor. I'm in the key of E minor, and I'll be playing, obviously, the notes that are contained within the scale of E minor, right? But in there are also arpeggios. And there's a fancy word for that, the diatonic arpeggios. But it basically means I'm playing the notes of the chords that are contained within the key of E minor. Now that might sound like some heavy theory for you, but when you think about it, it doesn't have to be that complicated, right? Because I'm sure you played some tune where it's like E minor, A minor, D minor, and G or something, whatever. And maybe when you heard that tune, the guitar were in tune, which mine doesn't seem to be right now. But anyhow, those chords are contained within the key of E minor. So that means I can play those arpeggios right in between the scalar notes of the E minor scale. So let me try that. We have that E note. Let's play the A minor arpeggio. There we are. And then let's play the E minor arpeggio down. Right? And let's do the D minor there. So we have... Woohoo! Oh, I'm sorry, it doesn't seem to be contained. So I was wrong about that one. Yeah, D minor is not in the key of E minor. Sorry, I messed up. Sorry. But anyhow, that's the point. You try to find the diatonic arpeggios, and then you can sort of weave those into the scale. But it doesn't have to be super theoretical and super complicated. In fact, you don't even have to know what those arpeggios are called. Just knowing a couple of scale boxes from the E minor scale is enough. Because what you can do is just try to play 1 note per string, and you're inevitably going to be playing arpeggios instead, without knowing their name. And you're going to stay in the key of E minor, so you're not going to really mess up harmonically. It's still going to sound good, and you're not going to know what the arpeggios you're playing are called, but you are going to be playing arpeggios, and you are going to be getting that break away from the scalar runs simply by playing 1 note per string instead of playing 3 notes per string. Okay? So you can really make it easier on you theory-wise. You don't have to know the arpeggios, you only have to know like 1 or 2 scale boxes from the E minor scale. So you could be thinking, okay, so let's do this E minor scale box on the 12th fret here. Instead of playing that scale up and down like that, what if I just played 1 note on that string and then 1 note there, okay? Okay, definitely sounds different than just doing, right? So, I'm not saying that sounds super good, but I am saying that if you start experimenting with that stuff and you start weaving it into your scalar runs, your playing is going to get so much more interesting thanks to the use of arpeggios here. So that's a long reply. Please let me know if it makes sense. It's always a challenge to break down these theory topics into chunks that are not so theoretical, right? But this is the best way I can describe it right now, where you sort of target 1 note per string, and that's gonna inevitably have you play arpeggios, even though you might not know what their names are, and it doesn't really matter. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Cool, so Pra is asking, is staff notation compulsory to be a good guitar player? So I think what you're asking there, whether you have to learn to read and write music, basically, in standard notation, which I'm really crappy at. So if you're happy playing the way I play, then I guess it's not really needed. You know, it depends on your situation. If you're just going to be doing what I do, but you know, play on the internet, whatever, write your own music and jam, you certainly don't need to know standard notation. But there are some situations, like when you play with other musicians that might not be playing guitar, then yeah, you definitely need to learn it, right? Because that's how you're going to communicate in written language, sort of. The written language of music is typically standard notation. Now, between guitarists, you can probably get away with tabs and sending recordings and stuff like that. But if you're gonna be like communicating with like wind players or whatever, then you're gonna have to be relying on standard notation. But most of us, I think, are not doing that, so you don't really need it. Cool, my man Phil is here from GMC. Awesome to see you. So Phil is one of the regulars on the GMC forum, and I'm always happy when I see you, man, because I don't know, you're a joy spreader. Every time you post something on GMC makes me happy. So thanks for being here as well. And yeah, for sure, I always make these live streams available, so you can definitely join in or watch it later on. Cool. So Mustafa is asking what kind of action you like to use. So that's an interesting question because I've been advocating for really low actions for the last 10 years probably. But now something has changed. So just since like a year or 6 months ago, I'm not liking it anymore. I realized that it's actually more worth getting a lot of good tone and being able to do, you know, really hit things hard and get a nice tone from that. Because with a low action, even if you got a really good setup, so all notes can ring and you can bend strings and stuff like that without any problem. But even so, the tone is not going to be the same, especially when you start hitting the strings hard. So if you had asked me like 2 years ago, I would say, yeah, sure. I would really, I have these special Japanese tools to really get my action down, and I was all up for that. But now I'm starting to change, and I think the tone and the dynamics you can get from being able to play both softly and playing like that, I think is worth a lot. So yeah, high action for me now. And what is considered a high action? Well, I think I was down to like 1 millimeter, 1.5 millimeter, if I recall correctly, on the 12th fret. But now it's more, it's like 2 or 3 probably. And if I were able to play well with higher action, like 5, I would do it, but I'm too crappy. So I have to find some kind of balance there. And then hopefully with time, I can get a better technique that allows me to do, you know, anything I want to do, whether it be playing fast or playing chords or whatever, and do that on a high action guitar as well, because it would give me so much better tone, right? Cool, Phil just got back from Wales. I hope you had a good time. I'm jealous, I'd like to visit the UK, it's been a while. Hopefully I can do it sometime. What should wear? What should you wear when you're in the UK? What should we are? You're gonna have to rephrase that one, Pro. Okay, so what should we learn after modes? Okay, that's a cool question. I'm assuming you're kind of thinking of you know, theory learning as you know, you start with the pentatonic scale, you go over to the minor, major scales, and then you learn the modes of the major scale. So you learn the Dorian, the Lydian, the Phrygian, the dominant, and that stuff, or Mixolydian. And then what should you do after that? So I think like a typical way of doing it would be to maybe learn like the arpeggios, like the 4-note and 3-note arpeggios, and I find those pretty useful because they help you target the strong notes. However, you can get very far with just the pentatonic scale, which is pretty much an arpeggio. It has 5 notes, right? And like a 4-note arpeggio has 4 notes, so it's 1 note more than a 4-note arpeggio. So what I'm trying to say is that there isn't really a predefined path for you, and I wouldn't recommend you go through like a curriculum that says you got to do this and then you got to do that, simply because we're not a clone factory, and I don't really advocate for any method that tells you do this and then do that. You know, I'm a big believer of like developing your individual musicality and your like musical personality, right? You want to develop yourself and not do the way I do. So having said this, it kind of depends what you're going for, what kind of tones. What tends to happen for a lot of people is they might start out doing like rock, pop, and stuff like that, and then as they mature musically, they're kind of looking for more dissonance, right? That happened to me. So if you're like me and you're kind of looking for more dissonance, then it might be a good idea to start exploring like the melodic minor scale, because with the melodic minor, which in itself is a fairly dissonant scale, I'd say. Some people would disagree. The more used to it you get, the less dissonant you think it sounds, but it can, one of their modes, like the altered mode, is super useful for getting those outside notes. And yeah, harmonic minor, same thing there, especially if you're into like Yngwie Malmsteen, neoclassical stuff, and even a lot of metal stuff, like fire, that kind of melody. You might want to use some harmonic minor. But I'd say I would, you know, if you know the modes, if you know the pentatonic scale, and if you can use them as opposed to just having memorized where the dots are, then you should be at a point where you can start using your ears. You could be like, yeah, I like that Dorian sound, but I also like the flat fifth of the Phrygian mode, so let's start combining that. And when you're at that point, you can really come up with scales on the fly, right? Because you're just looking for specific harmonies. So, for example, if you're in the key of E minor and you're going for that Dorian sound, that has Dorian written all over it. And then you want to add that, let's do the flat fifth. So I was adding that like classic blues note right here on the 15th fret G string. You probably, that's classic blues thing. So now you're combining the major sixth of the Dorian mode with the flat fifth of the Locrian mode would be the name, not the Phrygian, I was wrong there, Locrian mode. So when you combine those, then you're all of a sudden way above the standard modes thing. And I'm sure that scale has a name somewhere. I've never bothered finding it out. And it doesn't really matter, right? So this goes back to what I was saying is how you learn the scales. If you learn them to the point where you can recognize how they sound rather than memorizing the whole scale on the fretboard, then it's not as important what you choose to call the next scale, right? Because you will have gained something much more important, the ability to hear the tones you're going after. And that is precisely the reason why I always advocate for learning scales my way, which would be, you could just go back to the previous live streams where I covered the pentatonic scale and stuff like that. But anyhow, I like to learn scales not by memorizing dots, but just by playing a few notes and trying to like make a personal connection to the harmonies. And that sounds fancy, but it just involves coming up with something cool using just a few of those notes and not trying to do that thing, because that gives you no personal connection. It's just like a memory game where you learn your fingers where the dots are, but you don't really learn how you can use it musically, and you don't really learn to recognize the intervals. You are not making a personal connection to the scale when you play them that way. So what I like to do instead is have that root note as your foundation, and then just see if you can make a connection with it. Because if you practice it that way, what's going to happen is after a while, you're going to hear the characteristics of each scale, and you're going to start to recognize the sounds. So then you can sort of tell yourself, hey, I would like to hear that minor tonality now, but I want to add that major sixth, which is the Dorian notes. So yeah, you're going to be playing the Dorian mode, but you'll have a much more intuitive and personal way of doing it. So that's a long answer, and you can just look up the most standard scales and you can learn them. But I think that realizing what I just tried to explain you would probably serve you better than just memorizing some more scales. And, I'm just giving you a generic answer, obviously. I don't know your particular situation. Maybe you're already doing this. You're already doing it this way, and then you can, of course, disregard whatever I said. But I think for most people, what I said here is going to be beneficial, because there's a tendency out there, especially on the internet, to sort of explain scales as some magic formulas, this and that, and it's not that fancy. If we have a guitar, the guitar has 12 notes, and you can play some combinations of those notes and it's going to sound in a particular way. You can choose to give them fancy names, or you can just recognize how they sound and you can make your own combination. And you can, give them your own names, or you can look up what they're called. It doesn't really matter. The point is not how many scales we learn, it's what kind of harmonies we master and what we recognize. So if you just want to learn the pentatonic scale, that's absolutely fine. I would actually recommend that. And then you can, on top of that, you can do so much stuff. So here I'm going to play the E minor pentatonic scale, and I'm going to add all 12 notes and just show you how we can weave it together. And basically, I'm going to be playing all scales in the world right here, just on top of the pentatonic scale. So here we go. So far only pentatonics, right? So I'm adding the flat fifth there. 15th fret G string. And now I'm gonna add the Dorian note, plus that flat fifth. Now I'm gonna be adding some major note. So now I've added 3 outside notes, and if we add that on our 5 pentatonic notes, I've already covered 8 of 12 available notes. Let's keep going. Let's add the minor 6 and the major 6 on top of our other notes. And then finally, let's do some Phrygian, like the minor 9th, and let's do the major 9th there. So I've covered all 11 notes now, except the major 7. So let's add that, and we've covered all 12 notes, and I have not thought in terms of anything else but the pentatonic scale here. Okay, so I did all 12 notes there, yeah, so that's not very useful to you, I realize that, but it just goes to show you can think of it in other terms than, you know, scales and dots that need to be memorized. That's all I wanted to show with this explanation. I hope I didn't mess things too much up in your brains. Yeah, definitely throwing in a lot of SRV there. I love his pentatonics, they're so cool. Developing fretting finger accuracy using tips instead of fingerprint. So Nakuda, are you asking about, you know, sort of connecting with the right part of your fingertip? You know, that's a relevant question there, because we obviously want to fret with the end of our finger, right? If we can avoid fretting with this part of the finger, it is a good thing, right? The only real part where we want to use the flat part of the finger is when we play bar A chords or like do double stuff. Most of the time when we're playing single notes, like in a lead, we're definitely going to be relying on our fingertips, and that's the way it should be. That's when you can make a positive connection and you're in control. And also, if you're fretting with the right part of your finger, you need to apply much less pressure, which goes back to what we said earlier about being relaxed in our fingers. A lot of it goes down to correct fretting technique. So if you consistently fret with the exact right part of the finger, also right part of the guitar, I should say, because you want to fret right before the actual fret wire here, okay? So you're actually going to have to press less hard if you're fretting here as opposed to fretting further back. So whenever you have the option, try to fret as close as possible to the fret wire. Not on it, right? And definitely not past it, but right before the fret wire is a good idea. Metal solo, here we go. Sorry, couldn't help myself. That's for you, Manino. Cool question. How can such a shredder on RG survive with so little gain? That's a cool question. So on a personal level, I'm pretty tired of the high gain stuff. I've done a lot of it, and as you were hinting there, you know, I'm a bit of a shredder, I guess you could say so. Yeah, I come from that school where gain helps. Basically, if you have a technique that allows you to use not very much gain, that's a cool thing, because then you can make use of dynamics. So I guess I would say that generally it's harder to shred with little gain. The only exception being if you have a lot of gain, then you need to be in control of your muting, and that can be a little bit tricky. But in terms of playing evenly and getting a good flow, then obviously having a lot of gain helps. It's like putting a huge compressor on your sound, so that even a poorly fretted note, which barely can be heard, is gonna almost sound as loud as a perfectly fretted note, right? But to answer your question, if you work on your technique to the point where you are in total control of your notes and the strength with which you pick them and where you fret, as I was saying earlier, then it doesn't really matter if you play with or without a lot of gain. Again, the exception is obviously with gain, you're going to have to think of muting. It's not quite as critical when you have less gain. Of course, there are many advantages to shredding without gain. One of them being dynamics. You can really go between doing your average shred stuff and then, playing some heavy picking there and getting that nice squeezy tone, which you really wouldn't be able to achieve. It's not the same with high gain, right? And also to be able to throw in chords, I think, is super nice, and that in itself for me is a reason alone to not have to rely on shredding for your runs, right? It's really cool to be able to do. Maybe, I don't know. And you can do that, and then, with a lot of distortion, again, you get that. I guess it might work, depending on the sound. It can work, but it's not the same thing. So yeah, we want those. So yeah, it's really a matter of developing a technique where you can play a fast note with an even amount of dynamics, so you're in control. Because most of the time, the reason some shredders rely on gain is because it evens out the notes. It's like a huge compressor. That's what it is. Riker Spencer, can I use only one chord melody for an entire song? One chord melody? Well, if you're speaking about pop music, generally, the more simplistic, the better. However, making a catchy song that's super simplistic is difficult. But if you can't pull that off, then you most likely have a huge hit under your fingers right there. So I would say the answer is yes, for sure. However, a lot of us rely on some additional harmony to get something catchy going, right? But if you're capable of coming up with something that sounds catchy and you're sticking to one chord or one key, whatever, then yeah, by all means do that. That's going to be the most easily digestible song you can think of, and that's pretty much the definition of pop music, right? It's simple and it's catchy. Okay, cool. So Jose is asking about exercises, and I think that sort of allows us to wrap up a lot of things we've been speaking about here. I could give you like a standard reply here and says, well, if you want to develop your alternate picking, then yeah, there's an alternate picking exercise, and I'm all up for that way of doing it. I've been doing it since I started playing guitar, and we have so much coverage on that type of practicing at GMC. However, nowadays, my absolute preferred way of practicing exercises is by not strictly sticking to exercises, rather rely on patterns and variations. So what I tend to do for the stuff to achieve the kind of playing I'm going for nowadays, where it's kind of based around improvisation, and a lot of times you'll see me just maybe strum something and then play away. That kind of playing does not rely on strict exercises. So instead, I might find like some super short passage. So let's say that kind of thing, which is what we've covered in previous live streams as well. So it's a super basic thing, right? It's nothing. It's been done a million times in blues and rock, whatever. We're just doing 12, 14, 12, 14. In fact, we can do it down here in the key of A minor. So 5, 7, 5, 7 on the D string, right? So that's our basic pattern. How can we come up with variations? So I'll just... So what I did there was first, I did some harmonic variations and I kept the same rhythm. I kept doing... But I changed one note, so we got this instead, like a triad arpeggio. But it's the exact same rhythm. And then I can move that around diatonically in the key of E minor. So here's how I would go about practicing. I would do this as an exercise. I would move things around. So I guess that could be considered an exercise, but I no longer think of it as a strictly repeating exercise. Instead, I see it as a short pattern which is filled with opportunities of variation, right? So once I've explored those like harmonic variations, I can start exploring rhythmic variations. So instead of just sticking to that 16th note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, I can do maybe some... Play it a bit groovier, or however you would describe that. And so on and so forth. So I think this might be a bad reply for actually what you asked about. So I gave you more of my personal approach to it. And obviously there are a zillion different exercises, and what you want to choose depends on what you want to learn. And typically my advice would be start with whatever you like listening to. So if you're a big fan of, Jason Becker sweeping, then yeah, it might be a good idea to start with some sweeping exercises. And I can definitely plug the GMC website, because we have so much cool sweeping content. So you could just click that link below in the description. You can search for sweeping, and you're gonna first of all find my definition of sweeping. So you're gonna find a video that pops off with me saying, oh, here's what sweeping is. And then you're gonna find a zillion exercises and lessons covering sweeping. So it's a good idea to start with your personal preferences, right? I could tell you that, yeah, this exercise is really good, but chances are it doesn't really match what your musical needs and preferences are, and it's not going to be very useful to you. So you always have to start with whatever your personal preference is. Not only is that, makes the most sense, but also a lot of people actually end up putting the guitar down, right? We play for a while and then it's not inspiring anymore. And a lot of times, the reason for that is because whatever you were practicing was not personalized enough for you, right? So again, I'm going to plug GMC because we've structured the whole site around personalizing it for your needs, right? We don't want to turn you into like a one-trick pony that can play the exact way we think everyone should play. So that sucks, right? We want to develop you and your musical individuality and personality. So you have to start with whatever you like listening to and whatever your favorite musicians, guitarists, bands are, whatever they are doing. And that's going to be a good starting point if you can find exercises within those frames. So you could do this. You could use a search. For example, if you do this at GMC and you search for Yngwie, you're going to find a lot of Yngwie lessons, right? And you're going to find the technique he uses. But let's say you're not that advanced. Then you could use you can search for Yngwie Simple or Yngwie Easy. And then you're going to find like Yngwie for beginners lessons. I'm plugging GMC a little bit here, but I'm doing it because we've structured it exactly to meet these kind of needs, right? The need to personalize your learning, because that's how you stick to it. You're not going to keep learning if you follow someone else's curriculum. You have to design your own learning path. That is what's going to lead you to success. And in order to do that, it's good to have like a plethora of stuff to choose from that hopefully is relevant to your musical taste. And then again, final plug here, if you search for something on the GMC search and you have your desktop browser and you're not doing it from your phone, then you can adjust the difficulty, right? So you could choose difficulty level like from 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, and that's going to give you all the beginner and intermediate lessons. So you can skip the level 7, 8, 9, and 10 lessons. Those are really difficult, especially if you're searching for Yngwie content. Okay, sorry for that plug. I'll end it there. Cool, Ian, that's way too advanced. Exactly. We don't want to be too advanced, right? Again, hence the need to kind of personalize whatever material you're working with. But why don't we cover something, just one of my favorite pentatonic or blues licks, and I'll try to see if I can find something that isn't too difficult. Let's see. Okay, so key of E minor this time. Or scratch that, let's do C minor. So here on the 8th fret, right? And I love these kind of classic SRV-ish kind of bluesy licks where you rely on bending and you also kind of rely on playing several notes at the same time, so doing double stops. And especially if you're playing with a clean tone, you can just be a little bit sloppy with which strings you hit, because it's kind of nice if you get several strings ringing, and I'm going to show you what I mean with that. So if you do this kind of thing where you bend on the 10th fret G string and then you semi-barre with your index finger here on the B and the E string on the 8th fret, those notes are going to sound really cool when they ring together. So you can... Of course, you shouldn't really be doing that on an Ibanez guitar. It's better if you have a fixed bridge. But if you try this kind of thing, so you're going to play bend on the 10th fret, you're going to play E and the B string, that's your lick, and then you're going to throw in a little variation here. So instead of bending on the G string, 10th fret, you're going to be bending on the 11th fret B string. So you're going to do like this. And this is such a classic lick. So again, you're doing 10, bend, 8, 8, and then 11, bend, and then 8, 8. And then you can go all fancy and bend on the E string, so you get... So it's actually a fairly simple and basic lick, it's just 3 notes, but you throw in that little variation there, and you get a super cool kind of longer lick. But you know, what you come to realize is that a lot of longer licks might actually just be a combination of really short patterns. So what you perceive as someone improvising a long run, it might actually be much simpler when you break it down, but it looks kind of fancy because all these variations are thrown in on the fly. which again goes back to, you know, what I suggested, what is my preferred method of practicing these days. It's really working with patterns and variations. And I think that lick is a good example of that. Okay, the guitar phase, let's do it. Ooh, I'm all dizzy now after that. I need some sugar after that. I'm gonna die in here. So how do you play chords and licks in betweens? So there are a lot of ways of going about this. You know, the traditional, just maybe like doing some bluesy riff and then you know, you could go about it that way. But presumably what you might be asking about is like the way I do it here, where I throw in these kind of slightly jazzy chords in between just my random improvisation here. So that kind of thing. And I'd say the chordal work follows the same principle as my lead work there. I don't have a bunch of chords, you know, that I master theoretically and that I tend to play. Instead, what I do is I just look at the combinations that are available to me within the key I'm playing. So typically I'm playing in the key of like minor, E minor, maybe E minor. So if we're in the key of E minor, I'll just sit down and see, okay, if I have this bass note, what notes can I add on top? And I might come up with this kind of thing. Now, in order to really make it something useful, I want to be able to kind of slide around a little bit with it, so you can have like a moving bass line, and then add a melody on top, and so on and so forth. So I'll find like a shape that works for me. May it be that I like the sound of it, or just that the fingerings works for me. I'm able to play it, and then I'll just try sliding that up and say, okay, if we move it up. And then I'm gonna have to work out, okay, so where should I put my fingers? And please note that I'm not caring about what this chord is called. You know, I could probably work it out, but really doesn't matter to me. I'm just strictly looking at it from, you know, the perspective, is it contained within the key I'm in right now? So when you get used to doing that, and you use the approach I spoke about earlier about, you know, using patterns and trying to combine patterns instead of playing exercises up and down, then you're gonna sort of notice how the line between chordal work and solo work gets blurred, right? You might be doing... You know? So the only difference is that when I'm playing a chord, I'm actually doing many notes at the same time, you know? But I still have the same ingredient of improvisation in there. And it's always nice, of course, if you can alternate between like single note lines and double stops, right? That's a double stop. I'm playing two notes at the same time. And similarly, you can do it variations between playing single note lines and chords. So it all kind of blurs together, and at the end you're just playing notes on the guitar, whether you're playing them as a chord at the same time or whether you're playing them as a, you know, as a lead line, or whether you want to do double stops with two notes, or maybe triple stops with three notes, or maybe quadruple stops and then you're back to a chord, right? These are all words we have to describe different ways of playing, right? But in the end, if you have your own way of looking at it, you no longer need to break it down into those categories. You can just play, right? You have your scale and then you play, and sometimes you play many notes at the same time, sometimes you don't. So this has been an awesome session. I'm gonna end it here because I feel my ability to explain things is slowly deteriorating, and I don't just want to sit here and mumble. So I think I'll end it while I'm still on top, hopefully on top. Cool. Hi from Kazakhstan. Man, we're from everywhere. So I really hope this gave you some ideas on what you can work with. And of course, we started out with an initial topic of building melodies. And so the description contains a link that is going to give you those examples I spoke about in the beginning of this live stream. But hopefully you're going to find the content we covered throughout the lesson useful, because we really went all over the spectrum with all the great questions I got from you guys. So thank you so much for that. And if you have more questions, please save them for coming streams. We'll be doing a lot of these, and I'm doing them here on YouTube, obviously, and on Facebook, and of course at GMC, where you find all the content. Okay, guys, so thanks so much for tuning in, and yeah, have a good Sunday. Cheers.